I have a P.O. box now. You can send me mail if you would like to. You can send me your pocket change. You can send me a lottery ticket. I love getting photos of families and just hearing from you. I've gotten a lot of great letters recently. Really appreciate everybody who sent me support too. And I know there's a lot of people who want to participate and support the work, but don't want to use a credit card online. Totally understand. It's a great way. You can send me a check. You can send me a couple bucks, whatever it is that you want. Like I said, winning lottery tickets only if you don't mind. P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida 34432. Okay, Stephen, let's take some questions over at Locals, AllisonMorrow.locals.com, a great place to support my work as well. $5 a month to go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet. You get to ask the questions. If you don't like my questions, then just join the editorial board. Then you get to ask them yourself. Final question over on Locals is about whether you think public opinion about January 6th has changed. So Ginger Ninja, given this sentence by the judge, you getting probation and not ending up going to jail for being there on January 6th, do you think the judge had a change of heart? Was it public opinion that may have swayed the direction it would go? If it was going to be probation for reasons of you being a journalist, another assumption, that sounds like it would be grounds for First Amendment dismissal before trial. This is all very crazy, but Stephen, I'm so glad you won't be seeing the inside of a jail cell again. Many prayers answered. And taking you over just to follow up, this AP article, hundreds of convictions, but a major mystery still unsolved 3 years after the January 6th Capitol riot. When they discuss it, which I didn't know, they actually say that this is the largest prosecution in American history. Largest criminal investigation in American history. So that's fascinating. But they actually call it a riot now. And, back when this first happened, almost everybody was calling it an insurrection. And you were almost looked at and scorned if you were those of us in alternative media who wouldn't call it an insurrection and called it a riot. Do you think that the tide has turned? I mean, do you think that public opinion may have in some way had an effect on your sentencing by that judge? Is it safer now to be in the judicial system and go against the grain a little bit in these political situations, or at least this one in particular? I mean, maybe say you were sentenced 2 years ago. Do you think it could have possibly been different? So that's the question. What do you think about that?
I think public opinion has certainly shifted to some extent, especially probably with people on the right who are more, not as in tune to the alternative media, more in tune with the establishment on the right. When you have Tucker Carlson on Fox News showing some of this video of, here is the shaman or whatever who is portrayed as, this guy who is leading violence against the police. Oh, well, actually, mostly what he did is wander around the Capitol and, he said a prayer or whatever. I think stuff like that, has shifted public opinion to some extent. I wouldn't necessarily say it's had any effect specifically in my prosecution and sentencing. And in terms of, what the judge taking into account my journalistic intent, I think he certainly did that. He certainly understood that the circumstances in my case were unique. I guess he assigned some level of credibility to my testimony and sort of discounted some of the government's arguments as to that I was just making the whole thing up to try to cover for myself. But we did make selective prosecution motions. Sort of in that a lot of hours for my lawyer making those motions saying, hey, you're violating my rights because there are these other people who are similarly situated that you did not prosecute. But the problem with that is based on our current jurisprudence. That is a very hard argument to make. That is a sort of a very high bar that you have to prove. And so the judge basically in dismissing those motions is like, hey, I understand where you're going with this, but it's kind of laid out in, court decisions or the law that, hey, this is the standard you have to meet with proof. And the DOJ, the executive has a high degree of discretion in which cases they prosecute and which they don't. And basically he was saying, hey, you haven't sufficiently proved that your case rises to overcome this degree of discretion. But on the other hand, with sentencing, the judge can pretty much take anything into account that they choose to. There are some, criteria that Congress has laid out of basically, here are the reasons that you're sentencing people for, specific deterrence, general deterrence, being in line with similar cases that the judge has to take into account. But in terms of the facts, they're able to, consider a much broader range of facts than what specifically they have to consider for something like a selective prosecution motion. So I think that really, it explains the sentence, without necessarily any change of heart on the judge or any influence by public opinion. I think he did take into account all of the evidence that, regarding other journalists who weren't prosecuted, regarding my history of journalism that we had, filed with motions.
Tell people how they can follow you, because you are on Twitter at Stephen Horn, or Stephen E. Horn is your handle. I firmly believe that J6 would not have happened without the summer of love. Many Trump supporters perhaps subconsciously bought into the propaganda put out by the mainstream media and left-wing politicians excusing rioting. Don't be fooled again. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so basically we all remember, sort of a very, I guess, catchy meme, a good meme in the sense that it stuck with people, which was the image from, the CNN live broadcast where they have the reporter out there, stuff is on fire behind him, and the chyron reads, "Fiery but mostly peaceful protests." And that meme is reflective of a lot of the reporting that was going on in regards to the widespread rioting across the nation, which was, okay, yeah, it's fiery, but let's really focus on their intent. Let's focus on the more reasonable asked by the movement. Let's focus on stuff that doesn't involve destroying things. Let's focus on how blacks are being disproportionately killed by the police, or let's focus on this specific incident like George Floyd, where a man died while a police officer was kneeling on his neck. And so there's the same framing all across mainstream media, and which was adopted by left-wing politicians as well, mostly on the Democratic side, which is, sure, they're rioting, and we'll say that's bad, but we're going to frame overall the movement is good because this is a movement we want. These agree with our values, and so we're going to excuse it. And there's specific lines, I believe, Cuomo said something along those lines that the people have quoted quite often. But basically the idea of, oh, well, yeah, rioting, we're supposed to say it's bad, so we'll still say it's bad. But in this case, we don't really care. And so I think a lot of the Trump supporters, especially the ones who were there on January 6th, were much more, I wouldn't say media savvy, but more media following. So they were the type of people who are following the news of all the riots across the nation. They're the people who are following the news of, the violence in DC at the last two protests in November and December. They're familiar with, how Trump supporters have been attacked and whatnot. And they're familiar with, all these memes and ideas of whatever of, oh, the left is just excusing the rioting. They're basically saying, oh, we don't really care about rioting. And I think many people internalize that as, okay, well, I guess rioting is what you do now. And they might have thought intellectually to some extent, oh, they're just lying, this is propaganda. But I think there's also this idea of, oh, well, this is okay now, so now it's our turn. And I think without that history of the summer of love, as it's sometimes called, without that summer of rioting, I don't believe that there would have been enough, I guess, and there wouldn't have been that dynamic in the crowd that allowed so many Trump supporters to engage in these acts that, historically Trump supporters have not engaged in, and that these people personally, don't normally engage in.
If you're listening to Stephen's story and you're thinking, to get through this, I'm going to need a very good glass of wine, I have just the wine for you. If you go to AllisonWinePromo.com, you get 50% off my favorite wines. These are wines from Argentina, very remote, high altitude. Hey, we're talking about the media's love of extremism right now and the love they share for covering extremists and basically how everybody nowadays is an extremist. But you don't want to go to court, go to trial like Stephen. So then all you have to do is go to AllisonWinePromo.com, and then you can have your extremist altitude wine. You don't have to be a journalist. You don't have to do anything. other than have a glass of wine. And I don't think that the FBI is going to prosecute you just yet, but I can't promise anything in the future. The wine, again, is from very small operations, hand-picked grapes, very old vineyards, and just really dang good and a great way to support my work. So if you're already a wine drinker, get it as a present, get it for yourself, get it to apologize to somebody that you unfriended. Because you know what? I saw even the New York Times now is letting opinion writers say that January 6th was not an insurrection. So even the New York Times is allowing people to say that now, that it was a riot. The AP is calling it a riot now. They're not calling it an insurrection. I think that's a very interesting turn of events, and I'm going to ask Stephen about that as well.